Hey, welcome to this MB2-716 certification course, which is part 2 of 4 courses series. And MB2-716 is Microsoft Dynamics 365 customization and configuration. And in this course, you will be learning about entities, entity relationship, and fields. So welcome to this course, and I'm really excited to have you here. In case if you have not taken the part 1, then I would highly recommend you to first take the part 1 of the 4-part series and then go for the part 2, right? So let's see what you will learn in this particular course. So first thing, what you will learn is how to manage Microsoft Dynamics 365 entities, right? So in this, first we'll discuss how to manage and configure entity ownership and properties. So when you are creating an entity, you need to define what will be the ownership of this particular entity. And there are 2 types of ownership available. We'll talk about that in detail. And also we'll look at what are different properties available which you can use to configure and start using the entities as per the customer requirements or your requirements. Next, you will learn how to configure system entities. So in this, you will learn what are the different types of system entities available and how to configure them. Then you will learn about activity entities. So, there are different types of entities available. So system entities, activity entities. So in this particular section, you will learn what is activity entities and how it is useful, why you should have it, in case if you want to customize it or if you want to create new activity entities, then I'm going to show you that in detail. Then you will learn how to implement managed properties. So in Dynamics 365, you have a good option to control customizations for specific entities, right? So in this case, you will learn how to implement managed properties so that you are only able to customize it and not other people will be able to do that if they're importing the solution. So we'll talk about that entities. Also, you'll learn how to configure custom entities and security roles. So if you want to have a new functionality in Dynamics 365 which is not available by default, then you are going to create the custom entities, and we'll see how you can create custom entities and also how to define security roles for those custom entities. Right, so Dynamics 365 allows you to control entities with security roles. So we'll see how can you assign security roles and permissions to custom entities. So we'll talk about that. And finally, we'll learn how you can delete entities and what are the considerations you must have before you can actually delete an entity. So what can prevent entity deletion? What are the things you should consider when you are planning to delete an entity, right? So that's something you will learn in the entities module. After that, we'll talk about implementing entity relationships. So what is the relationship between 2 entities and how it can be utilized in Dynamics 365? So the first one is defined relationship types. So we'll talk about the different relationship types available inside Dynamics 365 for entities. Then we'll see how can you create relationship between 2 entities. So the different types of relationships available, and that's something we'll learn in this particular module, and you will learn how to create relationships based on your requirements. Under the relationship, you have something called cascading rules. So we'll talk about what are cascading rules and how the cascading rules apply and facilitate users to manage data entry and other things. Okay, so we'll talk about cascading rules. Then also we'll discuss different type of cascading behavior. So for each cascading rule, you will have different type of behavior, right? So for example, if you want to, if you have a relationship between 2 entities, and if you are linking entity 1 with entity 2 record, then what should happen to entity 2 record if you delete the entity 1 record, right? So those kind of things we'll talk about in the cascading behavior. And also we'll see how can you work with hierarchical data. Okay, so that's something we'll discuss. How to configure entity mapping. So that basically facilitates you the data entry in case if you want to pre-populate some data from a specific record to a new record that you're creating for different entity, then you can do that using entity mapping. So don't worry in case if you're not sure what exactly it is, I'm going to explain you that in detail. And then you have something called connections and connection roles. So without customizing, how can you use connections to connect 2 or more entities, and how the connection roles work to define the relationship, right? So that's something you will learn in the entity relationship. So it's a very good module. I'm sure you will learn a lot of things in that. Once we complete the entity relationship, then you will learn how to define and configure Microsoft Dynamics 365 fields. Okay, so we discussed about the entities. Entities are kind of tables in the Dynamics 365. For example, tables in SQL, and fields are like the columns in SQL. So for every entity, you will define multiple fields. So first we'll talk about what are different types of fields available. Okay, so we'll identify the different field types. Then we'll define the naming requirements. Then we'll be discussing about what are the different naming requirements, like how you should name your fields so that you understand that, and it's easy for any developer or any person who is customizing to identify that what this entity is all about. So we'll talk about the naming requirements. Also, we'll discuss how can you configure field properties and field display formats. So as you will see in the entities, you also have entity properties. Similarly, you have field properties. So there are different field properties available. We'll talk about that. And also how to display a particular field in different formats. So that's something also we'll discuss. There are different options available, so I'm going to take you through each one in detail. Then next is how to implement option sets and two option fields. So these are two types of fields available. Option sets basically allow you to select from the specific number of list of items, so that you don't need to manually enter that if you know the fixed things. And two option fields basically give you two options to select from. So that's something we'll see how can you create them and why you should create that. Then you will learn how to configure lookup fields and customer fields. So we'll be talking about in case if you don't want users to enter the details manually and they should be able to select from the list, then we'll see what are the lookup fields, and also what are the customer fields that allow you to select contact and account. So in case if you are not sure what I'm talking about in this, you must learn about the functional aspect of Dynamics 365. So you can take MB2-716 and MB2-717 courses, which talks about sales and service, and it will also prepare you for the certification. So, understanding functionality is very, very important. So these are things you will be learning and define and configure Microsoft Dynamics 365 fields, right? So once you do that, the next thing would be how to configure field customizations. So we'll talk about how to configure fields, how to configure field properties, how to use calculated fields based on your requirements. So we'll talk about what are calculated fields and how can you use that. You'll also discuss about roll-up fields. So in case if you want to display a value from different entity record, then definitely the roll-up fields can be the way forward. So we'll talk about how you can set up a roll-up field and how you can use it. Also, we'll talk about configuring global option sets, then how to create alternate keys. That's something we'll discuss, very important thing to integrate with other applications, or it can also be used for identifying the duplications. Then you will learn how to configure field security and security roles. So we discussed about the security role, but you also need to understand that you can control the security field level. So we'll see how can you configure field level security and also how it can be applicable with security roles. Then you will learn the status and status reasons. So every entity has fields called status and status reasons, which basically shows that whether the field is active or inactive, or there are different options available. So we'll talk about that. And also the status reason. So for every status, you have status reasons available. So we'll talk about this, and I'll show you how you can create the status and status reason, how you can customize the status and status reason for a specific entity. And finally, you will learn how to identify status reason transitions. So if there's a status change from one state to another, then how you can identify the status reason. So we'll talk about that and how you can enable that for custom entities, and also how you can use it with case entity. So that's something you will learn in this particular module. Then I would highly recommend you to go through the exam preparation notes and practice what you are learning within Dynamics 365. And this course, which is part 2, covers about 20 to 25% of MB2-716 exam curriculum. So I'm sure that you will learn and you will be prepared for that particular portion. And then I'm launching part 3 and part 4 to help you prepare for the entire MB2-716 exam. Okay, so you will not just be preparing for the exam, you will actually be learning in detail. So these will be again the big courses. You will be learning from that. And finally, I'll go through the course review, and we'll talk about what are the next steps. Right, so thank you so much for enrolling in this course, and I'm sure that you will learn a lot, and I want you to learn, practice, and prepare for the exam. So I'm really excited, and I'll talk to you in the next video.